Discover the wonder of the forest on this day of discovery.
A walk in the woods can be relaxing. Sometimes it's the silence, the solitude, with just the rustling of leaves or pine boughs in the wind. Sometimes I find myself absorbed with the sounds of the forest that remind me that I'm not so alone here after all. The haunting distant sound of an owl, the agitated cries of a blue jay, or the rustling of a squirrel overhead. And when I kick up a whitetail who's as surprised as I am, it's the sound of my own racing heart. A walk in the woods might be relaxing because of what isn't here, too. No cars, no computers, no 24-hour news, no overload of information or technology out here. A walk in the woods can be relaxing. It can also be renewing when we don't miss the obvious. When we don't miss the forest for the trees. When we take time to think about what these trees in this environment tells us about life and about ourselves. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks. So begins Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's epic poem Evangeline. Little did Longfellow realize when he penned those lines that generations of Americans would begin their hikes into stately old forests quoting his poem. As the earth's tallest and largest living things, trees en masse create within us a sense of awe, a sensation close to reverence. It was likely this feeling that led another American poet, William Cullen Bryant, to write a forest hymn, recalling the forested Garden of Eden.
The groves were God's first temples. Father, your hand has reared these venerable columns. You wove this verdant roof. You looked down on naked earth, and forthwith rose all these fair ranks of trees. Now they stand massy and tall and dark, fit shrine for humble worshiper to hold communion with his Maker.
Bryant acknowledged in his forest hymn that it was not only the beauty of the forest that captured his imagination, but also the physical processes of life and renewal that happen under the green canopy. Natural processes too complex to speak only of themselves caused him to reflect on the greatness of the one whose wisdom and goodness is seen in the wonder of the tree.
My heart is awed within me when I think of the great miracle that still goes on in the silence around me. The perpetual work of your creation, finished yet renewed forever.
It's this life and daily renewal of a working forest that captures the minds of those who get close enough to see what is really happening here. Professor Cal DeWitt of the University of Wisconsin and director of Au Sable Institute of Environmental Studies sees the forests of the world as wonderfully designed environments, supporting a rich and varied community of living things.
Forests are a principal means that God has of covering the face of the earth with his creatures, because not only are the forests the trees and the shrubs that make them up, but they also are harbors for all sorts of creatures. They are creators of their own microclimates. Not only one kind of microclimate, but many, many thousands of kinds that make favorable habitat for all sorts of things. As you move from the tropics to the poles in both directions, you'll find that these fantastic systems change their character. As we are in the tropics, for example, there are tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of different microclimates and habitats in the forest. This diminishes to mid-latitudes until finally the forests peter out as we're moving toward the poles. What are all of these little nooks and crannies? Well, they're ones that house the bromeliads and the orchids in the tropics, the tree hole spiders in the mid-latitudes, the birds of the forest throughout this entire range. So forests are systems. They are systems that create climate, create soils, restore water to the atmosphere, help in the cycling of the hydrologic cycle, and are participants in bringing the water back to the earth to water every living thing. This is part of the buttressing and the root network, which is going out in all directions. There's a kind of a star of roots that's running out 40, 50, 60 feet, and these roots all have smaller roots attached, and they're at work pulling up the rain as it's falling to the land. It percolates down, the roots pick this up. They use the water that they absorb to transport nutrients in from all around the area, and then it pumps the water up into all of those many leaves. These are needles, but of course each needle is really a leaf, and the water is brought through the leaf and back into the atmosphere. This is an important part of God's design for the hydrologic cycle, which is that great cycle about which we read in Psalm 104, and we also see repeated in one of our hymns, Thy bountiful care, what tongue can recite? It breathes in the air, it shines in the light, it streams from the hills, descends to the plain, and sweetly distills in the dew and the rain. The last two lines of that verse tell us about the way that things are cycled. And this is a principal cycler of water. Without trees, without other vegetation, we'd only have evaporation from surface water. Here we have actual pumps across the landscape, restoring the water, which sweetly distills in the dew and the rain. They are also very critical in producing oxygen because as a product of photosynthesis, not only is carbon dioxide used and water used, but oxygen is also produced. So the oxygen we're breathing in right now is oxygen that's been produced by trees and other green vegetation. Without them, we would not have this oxygen to breathe. And reciprocally, we're producing carbon dioxide. And the trees are also producing some carbon dioxide because they respire as well. But all this carbon dioxide is ultimately taken up again by the trees and by other green vegetation and incorporated into carbohydrates, into sugars, which fuel their life and ours.
One of the world's leading authorities in the Amazon rainforest is the former director of London's famed Royal Botanic Gardens, Sir Gillian Prance. Dr. Prance now serves as scientific director of England's impressive Eden Project in Cornwall.
Forests are absolutely essential to life on this planet. It is the forests and the oceans too that produce the oxygen that we breathe. They control the climate. If we were to cut down all the forests in the world, then very soon our atmosphere would deteriorate. And so forests are absolutely vital to us. Then the other aspect of forests is they provide so many useful things for us. They have the timber that we use, they have many medicines, foods, all sorts of things come from the rainforest. This is what this biome is about. As you go around here, you can see what comes from it. You see rubber trees, you see chocolate plants, you see coffee, and many other things that enter in our daily life. I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time in the rainforest canopy up in the tops of trees. And I think once you do that, you get a completely different attitude for trees. You respect them even more than walking into that cathedral on the floor of the rainforest, because you begin to see the way that trees function. You begin to see the animals that visit the tree, that they're doing something to attract animals, to pollinate them, or to disperse their fruits. And there are so many different mechanisms of this that I marvel more and more, both about the trees themselves and about the Creator who made those trees.
Both poet and scientist find, even in the death and decay of life in the forest, an ongoing miracle of rebirth. Bryant speaks of it in his forest hymn.
Written on your works, I read the lesson of your own eternity. Consider, all grow old and die but again. How on the faltering footsteps of decay youth presses, joyful and beautiful youth in all its beautiful forms. These lofty trees wave not less proudly than their ancestors which decay beneath them.
As you're walking through the forest, you might wonder, what is a hole in the ground like this doing here? Has someone moved the soil out? And the answer really is yes, and it's an ancient tree that has fallen here. There was once a tree standing right at this spot, and it has fallen in a storm in this direction, pulling the soil out of the pit and putting it into this mound. And here we still have some remains of the old roots, and then on this side is the decaying trunk. The decaying trunk is supporting all sorts of growth, new life, and this trunk is being converted here into soil. At this point, the trunk is almost unidentifiable. Here it is again, and it's running for some distance. The entire forest floor here is made up of mounds and pits, and some of the trees grow out of pits and grow out of mounds, and it gives a bumpy topography to the floor across the entire forest ecosystem. It's a remarkable thing to discover how forests work. Here, for example, is a Douglas fir stump, very old, and western hemlock, which preferentially germinates on dead wood. And here it germinated up at the top of the stump, grew up as a thin wisp here, began to run roots down, and here we see it many years later with a very strong trunk, roots eventually to form what will look like a contorted trunk as the stump rots away. Behind it you see a log which is also going through this process of conversion from wood back into soil. The beauty of a forest is that it lives and thrives on a forest which was there in earlier times. So generation after generation, forest builds upon forest, and it brings this whole area as kind of a praise. I see this as a kind of a piece of praise to the Creator, who provides not only for the living things, but through death brings forth life once again.
Because of these amazing facts and features of the forest system, many scientists who have studied them have been overwhelmed by their grand design. But on a more subjective level, it is the sheer beauty of the forest that seems to compel some spiritually sensitive biologists and botanists to speak of the forest in poetic and even worshipful terms.
Many of us, when we walk out into the creation, and you walk into one of the magnificent cathedral forests that the Lord has grown, and you look up and you see the towering trees, and you hear the wind blowing in the boughs above you, and the birds are singing. They're singing their praises to their Creator. I often break out in song. O Lord my God, when I behold the awesome wonder, the hymns of praise come to my lips because I feel like I should take my shoes off, that I'm walking on holy ground. I'm not worshiping the creation in any sense, but the creation calls me to its creator, and I celebrate the awesome wonder of our God by beholding the creation around me.
For thousands of years, people of faith have seen the signature of a creator in the physical environment. In the process, they've echoed the words of the Apostle Paul, who wrote way back in the 1st century, that the nature of God himself is reflected in the natural world.
For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Romans chapter 1.
Poet Bryant goes on in his forest hymn to speak of the evidence of God that he sees in the forest.
You have not left yourself without a witness in these shades of your perfections. That delicate forest flower with scented breath and look so like a smile seems, as it issues from the shapeless earth, an emanation of the indwelling life, a visible token of the upholding love that is the soul of this great universe.
I think there are very few people who've not been overwhelmed by natural beauty. I mean, you might come out of a forest and see a beautiful mountain view and your spine tingles. You stop breathing because it's just so beautiful. There's a sense of awe there. We have that sense of awe with God as well. By God's grace, his creation can prepare us for that greater encounter with him. Imagine that you've just been on a walk in the mountains and you turn a corner on a mountain path and there is this beautiful river, the forest, there's a mountain in the distance, and you just stand still. You're absorbed by the beauty of it. And I would say to somebody who's had that experience, just stop, take that in and appreciate and think, I am overwhelmed by the sense of natural beauty. But supposing there was a God who'd made this, a God who was even more wonderful than any aspect of his creation. Try and imagine how your heart would just be overwhelmed by encountering that God who you've discovered so tantalizingly in his creation.
Wow. Look at this structure. This is one of the most remarkable things that you can ever see in a forest. This is an anthill. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of ants in here with no visible organization, and yet they're shaping this beautiful mound. This is one of God's remarkable provisions in creation, because what these ants do, along with other ants and termites, is to do a principal recycling job in the forests. About 40% of the terrestrial biomass in the world is made up of ants and termites, believe it or not. And here we have some. What is this stuff that makes the mound? It's all of the spruce needles of the forest floor. So you see these spruce needles everywhere, and what these ants are doing is picking them up one at a time and moving them into the mound, and without any agreement amongst them, they're making this mound with all sorts of corridors, vertical shafts that they can go up and down, and at various levels in this mound are various activities. For example, the brood is maintained at one level, and if the level is too moist or too dry, what will happen is that the ants will move the brood up or down in order for the brood to maintain the right humidity for the growing of their young. And when they mature, they join the other adults to move out to do the work of recycling forest materials.
So again, even in the death and decay of the forest, there's evidence of design in living systems that support the ongoing rebirth of other living systems. This pattern of death and rebirth is a reflection of an even greater thought expressed for thousands of years in the Bible, that the Creator himself, the Creator of all living things, would clothe himself in the mortality of created substance in order to live and to die and to live again for us.
Knowing that God stepped into human history, became a man, and communicated who he was in a very special way. You might say he put a face on himself. The standard illustration is that if you wanted to communicate to a group of ants that danger was coming, the best way to do it would be to become an ant. And that's exactly what God did. He became a man in the form of Jesus Christ to communicate who he was more clearly than we could learn just from the natural world.
And this is the message of the Bible, that the Creator of the tree is also the Creator of all who walk through the forest. And because this Creator was loving by nature, he revealed himself through what he made, and then stepped into his own creation in the person of his Son, who, according to the Scriptures, was like a tender sprout that grew up out of dry ground before dying on a tree. Picking up the creation theme of Genesis, the New Testament Gospel of John says it like this:
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John chapter 1.
But why would the Creator of all life become a common carpenter to end up dying on a tree of his own making? Is it possible that the Creator has woven together the natural with the supernatural to stir up our curiosity, to bring us to himself? And is it possible that the wonder of a tree is not only seen in the natural importance of a forest, but also in what it says about those answers that we all need?
We are created with curiosity about the world. And so much of his revelation just addresses our curiosity about these things. But our curiosity is not about trivial things only. We don't just want to know facts. We want to make sense of our lives. And that's because there are all sorts of obstacles to human purpose and meaning in the world. For example, we live in a world filled with evil and suffering and pain. What's that about? When we think that there's evil in the world, are we right? Are we mistaken? Or is that just because we have a preference for a comfortable life? If there's some grander scheme in terms of which these evils make sense, we need revelation from God. Well, God understands that, and he provides us with information about how to make sense of pain and suffering.
And one of the wonders of a tree is the way it helps lead us to those answers. Long ago, according to the Bible, a man named Job thought about the wonders of a tree as he reflected on the evils and suffering of human existence. In the face of his own pain and loss, Job thought about a tree and saw in it an answer to his own needs.
For there is hope for a tree, if it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its tender shoots will not cease. Though its root may grow old in the earth, and its stump may die in the ground, yet at the scent of water it will bud and bring forth branches like a plant. But man dies and is laid away. Indeed, he breathes his last. And where is he? As water disappears from the sea, and a river becomes parched and dries up, so man lies down and does not rise. Till the heavens are no more, they will not awake, nor be roused from their sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait, till my change comes. Job chapter 14.
Yes, a walk in the woods can be relaxing. Sometimes it is the silence, the solitude, with just the rustling of leaves or pine boughs in the wind. And sometimes it's because we see in the wonder of a tree a picture of the spiritual answers we all need. Yes, when we don't miss the obvious, when we don't miss the forest for the trees, when we take time to think about what the tree is saying to us about life and about ourselves and about the heart of our Creator. Here we can relax, in the hope of everlasting life, in the presence of the one who chose a tree on which to die for our sins and to rise from the dead, like a sprout from a dry stump, to offer his life as his gift to us.